Welcome to Module 2 of this course entitled Creole Nationalism and National Literature. This module emphasizes nationalism and Creole nationalism based on historical experience of Western leaders. America was a colony of Great Britain, making the latter the center of nationalistic activities throughout Europe under its dominion. However, some of those British national leaders eventually migrated to the United States, settled in different local communities, making them Creole nationalists. This means that nation states that were created in the United States were ruled by European migrants who eventually mixed with local people, making them part of the imagined community in the unknown locality. Unknown in the sense that they were original European descendants, localized in the sense that they were absorbed into the local community. From the brief narrative, you can surmise that imperial nationalism in Europe extended into the other lands outside of the continent, which formed distinct independent communities from far from their imperial counterparts, mixed into the new localities. Okay? So for the next part, in the abstraction, we're going to talk about Creole nationalism. According to Benedict Anderson, Creole is a person of, at least theoretically, pure European descent but born in the Americas, and by later extension, anywhere outside Europe. In history, some European leaders and even ordinary individuals sought freedom from the fixtures of their own country. Owing to their desire to conquer new lands, they moved out of their kingdom and settled in America. These leaders bore children in America and elsewhere. By extension of their nobility, the newly acquired nation states contained localized imagined communities as an extension of Anderson's original thesis on the imagined community discussed in Module 1. Many reasons compounded in the migration of leadership, including geographical and political mobilization, independence, and the growing popularity of print capitalism through wide circulation of newspapers, and the ubiquity of vernacular translation of Latin texts, all of which contributed to the localization and independence of Creole nationalism practitioners who no longer sought advice from their motherland. So basically, what this says is that the Creole nationalism was an offshoot of those European descendants who migrated to the United States, and settled in different local communities. When they were already in the new communities, they acquired a sense of local nationalism because they shared with the natives the culture and the values and the norms, so that they were already incorporated into these localities. So that these descendants, these original European descendants, somehow became part of the local tradition. Henceforth, a new form of nationalism was also developed within the local community by extension of their nobility and their audacity in conquering lands. They also acquired a sense of commonality and shared understanding of what nationalism is all about. So by extension of the imagined community. The print capitalism, which was discussed in Module 1, which also facilitated in the national imaginings, was also present in the Creole nationalism philosophy. Why? Because the same mode of dissemination of information and communication through newspapers, translated in different vernacular languages, in different dialects, also made sure that the people were forming a sense of unity within the local areas. According to Doyle and Pamplona in 2006, they explained that in an essay, T.H. Breen contends that British Americans in the 13 colonies developed three national impulses: an imperial nationalism, a revolutionary nationalism, and the republican nationalism. Imperial nationalism means that individuals were part of the British government even if they were colonies established in America. So it means the imperial nationalists were also centered on the British Empire, okay, being the mother country. You have to remember that the Americas was part of the British colony, and the America was a colony of the British government. It was under the British government for a long time. Revolution nationalism explains the idea that oppositions arising from dominating rule resulted in new forms of nationalism, revolutionary in nature in the new locality based on the principles of human rights, human and natural rights against British influence. Eventually, the new states developed independent governments that worship liberty and republican citizenship. So if we have to connect this with our Creole nationalism, this revolution nationalism also contains the idea that when the Creole nationalists developed their own philosophy and national consciousness within the imagined community in the Americas, okay, and new ideals, new ideological euphemisms that gave rise to revolution nationalism based on the new locality were now exemplified in the in the imagined community consciousness. The grand journeys of political conquest were also accentuated in religious pilgrimage. The Philippines, for one, was no exception to Creole nationalism, as evident in the narratives of some insulares, or Spaniards born in the Philippines, who conquered lands and people according to the mandate of Spain in the beginning, which was imperial nationalism, but eventually succumbed to local ideals in nationalism, making them part of the localized imagined community. Further on, religious pilgrimage was probably the grandest journey of the imagination. Suffice it to say that the propagation of Roman Catholicism in the Philippines was a direct result of Spanish colonization of the country. Using the same analogy of Creole nationalism, Spanish friars who were assigned in different local communities shared commonalities of local people, somehow adapting to contextualized Christianity away from imperial Spain's influence. Local people's way of devotion and acceptance meant that individualized faith was more meaningful than how Spain wanted them to express devotion. It will be noticed that Spain had an oppressive government which seriously damaged people's faith in government, but they turned to faith, Catholic faith, with their immediate surround understanding of religion, mostly in community-related activities that stretched imaginings. As an offshoot, local people developed local rituals of faith according to norms surrounding their everyday life. Again, by extension of the philosophy of Creole nationalism, the impact on religion was also evidently felt when these friars, the Spanish friars, were assigned to different provinces, different places of the country, where they had to deal with local people. In so doing, they also managed to share commonalities. No? Eventually, the friars developed a cultural understanding of the local people within the context, so that the sense of nationalism in them was sort of diverted away from imperial Spain. Okay? But they had developed an understanding within the community that they were assigned. Okay, that is the entire meaning of this section on Creole nationalism. Now, moving on, we have Rizal and the invention of national literature. According to Mojarras, he argued that development of a national culture requires asserting difference done typically on the basis of a claim to a distant culture, history, and identity. In the case of Rizal, his European education would test just how nationalist his writings, considering his Western influence, juxtaposed with his desire to expose local sensibilities through common community interactions, folk rituals, among others. Such dichotomy exemplifies an assimilation stance in trying to establish equal footing of an Indio with his European counterparts in intellectual pursuits as embraced in European discourse. On the other hand, the idea of exemplary mind that has independent stand away from Spanish influence would be a guiding light in asserting local identity and culture. Indeed, by extension of his dichotomous existence, he would later realize an evolving national character based on internal discourse that would assert local imperatives, conditions, and sensibilities. Further on, you will remember that Rizal was a prolific writer. As such, his apprehensions and forebodings as a foreign national in Europe would be his best weapon not only to articulate languishing existence of his fellow countrymen, but to alleviate awareness of literature, promote local linguistics as local resources rally about. Using poetry, for example, would immortalize a deep longing of love of the country that would form the basis for subversion using the pen. Throughout his life, he studied local folklore such as Pasión and Comedia, studied Tagalog and local dialects in his provincial travels. Finally, Rizal's passion for national literature was not solely confined to literal publications of textual works, but more so in inculcating an intellectual discourse such as critical indulgences, as in the case of articulating mounting abuses of Spanish friars in disguise of religion. Such oppositions will instill upon him an intellectual in the highest order, so to speak. So basically what this says is that the national literature, okay, which embodies the ideals and the aspirations of the entire Filipino people, was part of Jose Rizal's goals, in his journey towards emancipation of the Filipino race. Okay, it was his best weapon, using the literature, as a form of expression through art, through poetry, through essay, through music. He used these weapons in order to advance the interest of the nation. So it was like an art for a cause, and in this case, it was a national cause. Okay, moving on, we talk about necessary fiction. In this section, you will learn the importance of studying literature that shapes national character. In Noli and Fili, okay, patriotism and nationalism are evoked so that readers' sensibilities are awakened. In fact, the Rizal Bill, which mandates teaching of Rizal, most especially Noli and Fili, are responsible in shaping national character as expressed in a hero's life through self-sacrifice. However, it is urgent to consider the importance of understanding culture, but one asks whose culture is being studied. Due to cultural heterogeneity of the Philippines, with diverse linguistic landscape, the question is urgent. In this sense, literature provides mediating answer to the vastness of cultural expressions. On the other hand, literature expresses universal values of freedom, and its contextualized version on the other hand. Such dichotomous understanding creates a robust and profound realization of people's expressions. It is a work of fiction due to the creative and imaginative process, but the underpinning themes are grounded on real situations. Yet, paradoxical truth is inevitable owing to the opposing views of freedom from abstract to specific struggles of Filipinos under Spain. This tug-of-war notion exacerbates feelings of loss and desperation. Then again, literature consoles with its powerful and soothing effect with the use of idioms, semiotic interpretations, among others. On the whole, people's struggles are part of the historical process that should not be sugar-coated just because a piece of literature has fictional attributes. Using the same example of Rizal's two novels, indeed the abuses of the friars and sad realities of local Filipinos are clearly expressed using fictional characters. Going back to the Rizal Bill, its insistence on the merits of understanding Rizal's works highlights people's collective nationalistic struggles, even if there are provisions that caution the reading. Public and the religion undertones, especially on attacks against Catholicism, invoked in many parts of the two novels. Nevertheless, the Rizal Bill is the legal handmaiden of a Philippine state that seeks to regulate education to accomplish its dedicated task of developing moral character, personal discipline, civic conscience, and teaching the duties of citizenship. A quote, Necessary Fiction, page 4. This greatly shows interconnectedness of literature and historical process that readers, lawmakers, and other leaders should visualize. Okay, so the whole gamut of this section here just immortalizes the power of literature in advancing the cause of, of the nation. So, from the perspective of Hispanization in the Philippines, okay, during the time of Rizal, like I said before, he used literature in order to create an awareness, okay, a concerted awareness amongst people to rebel against an established order using the pen. So in a non-violent way, he was able to advance the sentiments, okay, through emancipation by the use of the pen. So in this case, it becomes a necessary fiction. The fiction in the sense that it is based on fictional characters, but the underpinnings and the undertones of the stories are based on actual realities. And that is the main essence of this section, being the that national literature is the epitome of human expression that emancipates a population such as the Filipinos that are experiencing suppression or repression even in today's society. That's it for Module 2. I hope you enjoyed reading, and thank you very much. This is your Sir Olobia speaking.